Hello. This is Dr. Wally here. I'm an IMG who had ended up matching into internal medicine. And, I wanted to create this video as a source of inspiration and a guide for those embarking on the USMLE journey and, help inspire those who are in the shoes that I was once in. My story starts off when I had initially first graduated high school, and I ended up being fortunately accepted into a 5-year medical school program, which is, very different from what the system here in the States is. Typically speaking, physicians or students in general who aspire to be in the medical field first go through 4 years of undergrad, followed by another 4 years of medical school if they get in directly, which is a total of 8 years in a sense. Typically speaking, it's longer. Nonetheless, I was very fortunate to have, started off directly out of high school. It was 2019. It was a time where I had been young and I was clueless. I was truly, enjoying that initial phase of independence, a new life, a new journey, a journey where I am starting to grow into an independent individual and experiencing life away from my family. In the midst of enjoying having fun and not necessarily, spending too much stress or thought into, my medical studies, I'd always knew that I wanted to pursue a journey and a career here in the United States. Ultimately, my university was hosting a live session with alumni who had been invited to give us a talk of what it was like and what it truly took to match into the United States. And that was when I first, had my awe of inspiration. It was truly inspiring to see how someone else had carried and completed and fulfilled a dream that I aspire to hopefully one day fulfill. But rather, this graduate had shared a lot of obstacles he had went through, but it was at the end truly an inspiration and opened my eyes to the realities of what it truly takes to indeed match in the United States. Ultimately, it was during my first year of medical school where COVID had struck. The pandemic had sent everyone into lockdown, and ultimately I had to, go back home, and the rest of my year moving forward had been studied online, and it was truly an experience that could not be forgotten. Time would fly by, and ultimately I was very fortunate to make it to my second year of medical school, and the COVID period had really been a moment of reflection, a time of solitude where everyone was really understanding themselves a lot more. And going into my second year of medical school, I had become a little bit more mature. I had been filled with a burning desire to continue growing and excel in a sense. But deep within me, regardless of what I did, I never felt that what I did was truly enough. And as we all know, the medical field is one that has the next step that everyone wants to chase. And it was during this time where I had a lot of friends and peers, seniors of mine, who were also pursuing a career and a dream of practicing in the United States as physicians. Ultimately, many of them had unfortunately not passed some exams, had not matched into, the cycles they were applying for. And it was a moment of reflection, a moment that really made me think about what it truly took to really match and put yourself in a strong position to apply and of course match in the United States. And I think it was that pivotal moment during this whole journey where I had understood that the reality of this whole USMLE journey, this match process, was not about scores as much as people emphasize. I was always under the impression that you want the 260s, the 270s to ultimately, land a spot here in the United States. But, I'll talk about it down the line, but it was truly a pivotal point in my mindset, in my thinking process, that maybe there's a little bit more to the whole match process and this whole USMLE journey other than just scores. But with that epiphany, I began to focus just a little bit more on other aspects that will help me grow into the dream physician I aspire to be through volunteering, healthcare initiatives, and giving back to the community and sense back home as well. Fast forward in time, I began my third year of medical school, where that is truly where a lot of that focus of USMLE Step preparation began. It was during this time where I read a lot more about what was needed to register for these exams, the costs, the fees, and how much some of these resources were costing, what resources I needed to use to focus on, hopefully securing and trying to guarantee, in a sense, some of the scores I was dreaming of and chasing. But the point is, third year of my medical school is when I really started looking into these things at a deeper and closer level. I, of course, got more involved with research initiatives, publishing some literature reviews, having some posters presented and all these things, but ultimately, it did seem that my initiatives had taken a delayed start in a sense. I had finally gotten around to beginning to start for my USMLE Step 1 exam, and I'm not gonna lie, it was truly a hectic process. We are often overwhelmed with a lot of resources that, might not necessarily benefit us, might not necessarily translate into a score to begin with. And my time was when the USMLE Step 1 first converted into a pass-fail system. And studying for this exam, I had implemented too many resources, I believe. I was doing my Anki reviews, I was spending hours on end trying to keep up with my new cards, my review cards. I had been watching a lot of, videos that maybe I didn't really need in this. To put it simply, I had used too many resources, which is something that I truly regret. I believe a lot of the time I had spent jumping around between resources, feeling that I'm missing out on something, could have been spent doing something better. And to sum up my Step 1 experience or studying experience, I would say it was, truly hectic, disorganized, and most of all, I really do wish I had some sort of mentorship or some guidance in terms of just how to approach studying, how to go about this whole USMLE prep, not necessarily learning the topics, but rather where to invest my time, where should I focus my energy, and most of all, what was truly important for this whole journey to begin with. Fast forward in time, and ultimately I had booked my exam for the summer after I completed my third year of medical school. I was very fortunate. I had, put myself in a position that had been comfortable enough to pass the USMLE Step 1. But right before I was about to start my fourth year of medical school is when things began to look a little bit fuzzy. It was during that time before I began my fourth year of medical school when, I had to sit down with my family, and, the expenses of medical school were far beyond what is sustainable. And ultimately, it was a question of me dropping out or not. It was during that time I had no idea what to do. On one hand, I had a burning desire, a dream, a vision, a passion to one day become a physician here in the United States. But in reality, things aren't as smooth sailing as what we would hope for. And reality was that perhaps I may not be able to start my fourth year of medical school. It was during this time where I felt very down. I, in a sense, felt that perhaps some of my dreams and ambitions were a little bit too, ambitious in a sense. But fortunately, things happened, and ultimately I was able to start my fourth year of medical school. What began as one of my lowest points of my life, where I had realized that I may not complete my medical education, had later become a source of inspiration, a source of motivation and discipline, and in a sense, a second chance to fight for the dream I yearn for. I had began my fourth year of medical school with a burning desire to do whatever it took to fulfill my dreams. Ultimately, I had worked many part-time jobs. I took upon every opportunity to fight for my dream and vision. I had worked multiple part-time jobs, juggling my roles as a librarian, a USMLE tutor, as well as a gym and lab supervisor. And it was during the start of my fourth year, as I was juggling a lot of these part-time jobs, I had began my Step 2 CK prep, coupled with a lot of my rotations and university exams. While these times may have been hectic in a sense, I had a deep desire, a drive to keep pushing past this discomfort. Doing that allowed me to feel that I may have some control over some of the circumstances that I am surrounded by. As I discussed before, I wanted to grow and push towards the dream physician that I aspire to be in the future. Ultimately, I began to be part of the mentorship program at my university. One week after the other, I had began to realize after a lot of research that electives were something that could not be missed out on. Especially considering that my dream career goals were within the United States, it was very crucial for me to address this factor. And as we all know, the USMLE journey is a costly one, and electives are no exception. To put it very simply, I could not afford to pay such large amounts to spend a month somewhere training and gaining experience. Because I could not afford these electives, the anxious search had began. I had cold emailed every single residency program in the United States, hoping that one or two would be able to respond to me with perhaps an opportunity that would be at least budget friendly. I had reached out to all the programs in the country, waiting countless weeks and months on end without any responses. And finally, I started to receive some emails, however, many of which were rejections. And it was during that time where, of course, I was still juggling a lot of my part-time jobs, coupled with my Step 2 CK exam prep, as well as maintaining my performance at medical school and attending my rotations, where finally there was some hope and some programs had responded to me in a favorable manner. And I had received, favorable responses from particularly two locations, two programs that had offered rotations without any cost, but the catch was to create an affiliation with my university, which on its own was a hectic task to complete. Nonetheless, months go by, and fortunately we were able to sort out a lot of these little details required to attend these electives, and of course I was truly grateful that not a single penny was requested from me to attend these rotations. I had then figured out 3 months in total, 2 of which were in California and 1 in the West Virginia area. And ultimately, because I wanted to pursue a journey in internal medicine, I felt very, very fortunate and grateful. And in a sense, it felt like a deep weight was lifted off my chest, as a lot of the money I had been working for and saving, could have been used in other resources and in other areas that truly needed it more. And by the end of my 4th year, I had been very fortunate to have the opportunity to present during a TED Talk in the region, and I had presented a topic and a talk by the title of The Sailor's Destination, where I wanted to uplift and inspire others and instill a mindset of discipline. And it was definitely a fortunate opportunity that I had been granted, and I'll definitely link that down below. And I got to the end of my 4th year, fortunately. My summer had began, and I had been able to, thankfully raise enough money to fund this trip. My summer began, and I had a date in mind for my Step 2 CK just before I was going to fly to California. I had completed many NBMEs, and I felt very confident, very comfortable. I didn't feel anxious at all, and I thought that I was trending towards the direction many of us would, hope to trend towards, and seeing that perhaps that 260, 270 score was, within hand's reach. Filled with confidence. It was during the day prior to my exam where I'd unfortunately, been involved in a little car accident. Of course, it wasn't a major one per se, but the incidences that followed and the drama that comes with a car accident might have shaken my confidence just a little bit. Nonetheless, my exam was the next day. I was running out of time and I had a flight to catch. And 7 or 8 hours later, I had walked out of my Step 2 CK exam feeling very confident in my performance and how I tackled and addressed and answered many of those questions. Later, taking my flight to the United States, it wasn't the most, typical travel because, simply because of cost, concerns and cost issues. I had booked many independent flights. Ultimately, it was a 30-hour trip in total. Nonetheless, I was able to start my sub-I internal medicine rotation in California the very next couple of days. It was during this rotation where I felt like I was living the dream I once envisioned. It was, somewhat of a reality come true. I was learning, I was deepening my knowledge and involving myself with the healthcare system that I aspire to be a part of in the future. A couple weeks go by and our Step 2 CK results finally come out, and it wasn't the result that I had anticipated. It didn't really meet the expectations I had. It wasn't the amazing stellar scores that I had achieved while, taking my NBMEs, and it was, in a sense, what seemed to be an average score then became a thought of, will I truly match into the United States with such average performance? Saying I was disappointed may be truly an understatement. At that point, I still had the rest of my internal medicine sub-internship rotation to complete. I had another month of cardiology to complete in California, and I had depleted a lot of my resources, and simply, the score felt like an obstacle in a lot of the dreams and the vision that I had in line. I ended up seeking for advice from a lot of my mentors, and I was even fortunate enough to have an associate program director at a program allow me to kind of run my application by him. He reviewed a lot of my personal statement versions, he reviewed my CV, my ERAS CV, and there was a lot of, rebuilding and growing and formulating a picture that I thought might make up for a lot of the weaknesses in terms of scores, or USMLE Step 2 CK score in my case. I continued to work very hard during my rotations. I had, went through my application, countless and countless of times, and I continued to do my best regardless. It was the end of my 2 months in California, and I was ready to finally board my flight to West Virginia, but it was during that time when Hurricane Hillary had hit the area that I was living within. It was truly a hectic time, and the only thought process I had was, will I miss my flight? Will I make it to my next rotation? And looking back, I should have been a little bit more concerned about my safety, but it goes to show how important these rotations were to me, how important it was for me to show up, because I felt like these were the opportunities where maybe I can redeem myself in a sense. Ultimately, although the flight from California to West Virginia was delayed 3 or 4 times, I had been able to finally board it, and it was a very hectic flight, very bumpy in a sense, didn't feel as safe as one would think. Nonetheless, a couple hours later, I'd made it to West Virginia. And it was a very different experience, very unique, and it contrasted my experience in California. Nonetheless, I was very fortunate for the learning opportunities. And by the end of my 3 months of US clinical experience, I was working with a lot of physicians, connecting with many, and I truly enjoyed the process, and ultimately was very fortunate for the learning experience and got a total of 10 US-based letters of recommendation. Following the completion of my US clinical experience, I had flew back to my medical school, and it was during that initial period where I took part in a lot more motivational speaking. I took part in a lot of career pathway talks and how to obtain electives in the United States, and I was very fortunate to have even began leading my school mentorship program. And comes around September, leading up to that point, I had been still juggling a lot of my part-time jobs. I had also went through my application, my ERAS CV, my personal statement. I had went through them maybe 20, 25 times, each document, just polishing it further and further, getting opinions and trying to get the most perfected version that I could envision. I had tried to create a profile, a CV, an application that when programs took a look at, could not simply ignore. I had tried to create a profile that, in a sense, screamed purpose. I ended up applying to approximately 120 programs, and so the match season began. During the initial phase after applying to all those programs, it was, during a time where we only had 7 signals, and the initial phase had been very quiet. I then had my first interview sent out to me at the end of October, and I still remember what it felt like to receive an interview, to feel acknowledged and recognized, and to be seen for a lot of the effort that I had built up to that point. I was very fortunate to be in a position where interviews continued to come my way. And for me, a lot of my interviews came in 2 main waves. The first wave was at the end of October and the start of November, and at the end of November and the start of December. And with every interview I had received, I had then felt that perhaps, it's not all about the score that I was truly concerned about. I felt like I had been recognized for a lot more than just a 3-digit score. It was very hard to coordinate a lot of these interviews, especially with the time zone differences and juggling work and my study commitments to my university. But I approached every single interview like it was my only one. I had endless practice. I created documents, drafted out answers, rehearsed, tried to make things as natural as possible, and worked on a lot of my public speaking skills. And every interview, I truly felt grateful, felt fortunate for an opportunity to feel wanted. And after every interview, I felt truly grateful and felt that a lot of my efforts had been recognized. Ultimately, after many, many months, I had ended up with a total of 17 interviews by the end of the season. And I was very fortunate and grateful to be in such a position. And again, I felt like I was stressing about the wrong things, and perhaps I could have had a stronger application if I had focused on a lot of the other aspects that I should have focused on earlier on. March comes around and the emails for the NRMP match are sent out. And fortunately, the email I got was, "Congratulations, you matched." It was during this time where I had a great sigh of relief. A flow of emotions had erupted from within me. And I felt like a lot of the sacrifices, the discipline, the perseverance, and the time I had invested in many of my initiatives had been truly worth it all at the end. And it was during that moment when I had realized that it's an amazing accomplishment to academically excel, but I had realized and recognized that medicine and just life in general is about a lot more than what we give credit to in terms of scores. And sometimes we just need to focus a little bit more on building ourselves, building our characters, and becoming what we envision to be in the future. Fast forward in time, I was very fortunate to have graduated from my medical school and then boarded a plane and flew to the United States, where I would then start my first day of residency in internal medicine. And that brings us to our current day, where of course there's a lot that happened in between since starting residency, but I felt like this was truly an opportunity to help inspire others and bring a light of hope to those who need it the most. As a result of this journey, I had realized that it's very important to, number one, be grateful and thankful for what we have. And in addition to that, it's very, very important that we don't just get lost in the little details of what scores are and do they truly define us as who we are as physicians, as clinicians. And most of all, to me, this journey taught me the value of, being extremely disciplined, persevering towards a goal, and growing as not only a learner, but also as a teacher, helping others grow along you. And most of all, this journey had taught me the value of discipline and perseverance. So when you feel in doubt or feel that things are not heading towards the direction you once aimed for, take a step back and truly analyze what's going on. Because in the end, we need to make sure that we take every opportunity as an opportunity for growth. Overall, I hope this served as some sort of inspiration to all those embarking upon the USMLE and the match journey here in the United States. I hope that this serves as the light at the end of the tunnel, because I can definitely promise you that the grass is greener on the other side. I truly do wish you all the best of luck, and no matter what happens in life, just keep your head up and continue to try to grow towards the vision and the dream you have in mind.